Are you struggling to find and catch bass consistently as water temperatures drop into the 50-degree or even 40-degree range? If you are, we got you covered in this video. We're gonna have 3 different anglers from 3 regions of the country sharing their best areas for consistent bass fishing as water temperatures start to fall. Let's get into it.
Rock piles are absolutely going to be one of my favorite targets to fish. No matter where I'm at across the country, if you can identify a rock pile, chances are you're going to find some bass as well. An isolated rock pile is something that a lot of times isn't on a map. A lot of times you got to stumble across them by using your electronics. Sometimes you can see them. Sometimes you can find them if there was a big drawdown on the lake that you like to fish. The key here is an isolated rock pile or a boulder can be some of your best isolated targets to fish. Generally speaking, regardless of bass species, they all use rock piles. And it's something that provides them with a home base to feed. So it's a good ambush location for ambushing forage. It's a good place to hang out for warmth, especially during the colder water periods, because those bigger rocks will absorb sunlight and therefore provide heat. And it's a lot of times it's just a location that will have a lot of bait fish coming to it, whether they're crayfish that are using the rocks to create their homes in, or it's bait fish that are going to the rocks to feed on some of the different filament and things that are starting to grow on the rocks. In either case, one single boulder or one small rock pile can be its own ecosystem. And that's what makes them such great places to target for an angler. It's because not only do you know exactly where that fish might be, it's also a place that any fish swimming by will probably want to stop at. So it becomes a great location to target and to replenish so you can continuously fish it over and over again. So keep that in mind. Don't think that a single rock pile is something that you should overlook. If you stumble upon one, mark it because it's a place that you'll be able to catch some bass. One of my absolute go-to baits anytime I'm fishing around isolated rocks or rock piles is a football head jig like this Dirty Jigs football head. I've got it matched up with a 3-inch Berkeley Boss Scrub on the back. It's a killer combination, but really what it comes down to when I'm fishing isolated rock and rock piles is I want to feel that with my bait. I want to know that my bait is in the strike zone. If I'm fishing a crankbait through that area, I don't know unless I deflect off that rock that I made the right cast. I know exactly where my bait is when I'm throwing a football head jig. And this jig does a great job at mimicking the forage that lives around that rock, whether it's a crayfish or bluegill. It's a good bait that does not get hung up that much. You can beat it up in the rocks. You can deflect it off the rocks to create reaction strikes. It's one of those things that just is a very versatile bait anytime I'm fishing around isolated boulders or isolated small rock piles, because it generates strikes and it makes me an efficient angler. And that's what I'm looking for when I'm looking for these targets. And keep in mind, guys, one tip for you, if you're trying to identify rock piles, and this works whether you're on natural lakes up north, or you're on rivers down south, or you're on reservoirs, wherever, look at the bank. If you see areas on the bank where you've got some scattered, isolated big rocks, a lot of times that same general area will have a big rock under the water as well. So just look at the bank. If you're on a bank that's completely flat with nothing, chances are there's not going to be an isolated small rock pile or boulder. But if you see some around in that same area, that would be a good place to start your search. Now, if you can find a boulder on a pea gravel point, more power to you. It's probably a fantastic spot, but in most places that probably does not exist. So use the bank, the exposed bank, to help you find those hidden gems of rock piles and boulders that are underneath the water.
In the Ozark region of the country where I live, we have a lot of highland reservoirs like Beaver Lake and Table Rock Lake. One key characteristic of pretty much every highland reservoir is a lot of rock. Rock is going to be a great place to find bass as water temperatures start to drop for 2 specific reasons. The first is that rock is going to hold heat, which is going to attract bait fish as water temperatures start to fall. Second is that rock really attracts a lot of crawfish. And for whatever reason, when water temperatures are between 45 and 60 degrees, the crawfish in my region of the country, the Ozarks, they get really active. And this means that the bass are going to congregate wherever the crawfish are, which is going to be rocks. Now, for me, I like to fish offshore a lot of times, and I find that my most consistent bite in November and December, as water temperatures are dropping, is fishing offshore rock piles. Rock piles are basically areas of bigger rock that are set out in the middle of the lake. I catch fish in rock piles from as shallow as 5 feet of water to as deep as 45 feet of water. And it really just depends on the lake I'm on, where the fish are setting up, and what I feel like the fish are doing on that given day. The way I test out which rock piles are better than others is I will basically just start graphing with my side imaging on my fish finder, find a rock pile in each depth range, 5 foot, 10 foot, 15 foot, so on, and then just fish them. One thing about rock piles that's kind of interesting is that you're not always going to see the fish on your electronics around those rocks. The reason for that is because the bass are feeding on crawfish, and crawfish are going to be sitting tight to the bottom. Therefore, for the bass to actually feed on those crawfish, the bass are going to have to get really tight to the bottom as well, and they're not going to have any separation between the fish and the bottom. This makes it very hard to see them on your down imaging, and also because you're fishing around a big rocky area, you're going to have a lot of different shadows that are cast by the rocks themselves, so you won't be able to see the fish on side imaging either. Now, one trick I have for actually finding some fish on my side imaging around these rocky spots is to look for really big boulders. Bigger boulders are present on pretty much every highland reservoir. You just have to spend a little bit of time looking for them. And the great thing about fishing around boulders is that you can actually look in the shadows of those boulders on side imaging and see individual dots, which are going to be your fish. These are fish that are just swimming and suspended around those boulders. If you see some dots in the shadow on your side imaging around those bigger rocks, you know there's fish there, and it's a higher likelihood you're going to catch fish in those areas. If you can't find big boulders though, don't worry. Just find those really good looking rock piles, make 5 to 10 casts in that pile, and if you don't get bit, move on. Most of the fish are going to bite right away if they're a quality fish and they're actually aggressive. So don't spend a ton of time on each rocky spot, 5 to 10 casts, and move to the next one. My go-to bait when I'm fishing in this situation is my trusty Fish the Moment offshore jig. We're trying to imitate crawfish, and this football jig is a great way to fish in a lot of different depth ranges and be very efficient. You can work this bait slower or faster based on the conditions. If it's really sunny and calm, drag that jig really slow. If there's a lot of wind and cloud cover, you can work that jig faster, hopping it aggressively off the bottom. My Fish the Moment offshore jig really works great because it has this double cable guard weed guard, which helps it come through any sort of brush or wood that might be in those rocks. And then the head is designed to come really smoothly through bigger boulders and cracks, so you don't get hung up nearly as much. I'll pair that with a Jewel VersaCraw Junior trailer, and I'm going to only open up the 2 middle gates on this trailer to make it more like a chunk. As water temperatures are colder, you want less action on your trailer, so by opening up just the 2 middle gates, you're going to have that chunk action and a little bit less commotion going on behind your jig. I'm going to pair that Fish the Moment offshore jig with a Denali Covert Light 7'2" heavy power fast action bait casting rod. I'll put that on 16 to 18 pound Sunline FC Sniper fluorocarbon, and I'll pair that with my $50 Abu Garcia Black Max reel. I've had this reel now I think for 5 years, and it's held up the test of time. I have like 14 of these things. I've only ever had one go bad, so for a $50 reel, definitely gets it done. I pick them at Walmart when I go to get my groceries, and it all works out. So definitely check out these Black Max reels if you want to get a lot of different setups, and you can pair them with a little bit nicer rod like this Covert Light rod, and you have a good sensitive rod with not that expensive of a reel. It makes a great setup overall. Now to the next angler.
All right guys, so today I'm on Lake Guntersville, legendary Lake Guntersville here on the Tennessee River, and you know, to be completely honest, during the fall I don't fish a lot of traditional rock piles this time of year, and the reason for that is because most of the time I'm fishing rock piles, you know, in the summertime on the TVA or even during the late winter time. But during the fall, these fish are transitioning into you know, a lot of the creeks. They're following the bait fish, whether it's threadfin shad or gizzard shad, and the type of structure that's really key this time of year is what you see right behind me, these transition banks. It may be a bluff wall or it may be you know, a 45-degree bank, and what you want to look for is those little changes. So whether it's a 45-degree bank that goes from chunk rock to a little baseball size rock or gravel, or you see a bluff wall like this that maybe one part of the bluff ended up breaking off and creating a rock pile right next to it, or the bluff ends, you know, the ends of the bluffs where they start to taper out. Those are the type of areas that I really focus on this time of year, because it's a great opportunity for those bass to corral those bait fish up against you know, this type of hard structure. So here are two of the baits that I really like, and I'll kind of dive into some other options too. The first thing I'm usually going to reach for during the fall is a spinnerbait. A spinnerbait is a perfect imitation of a school of shad, and it allows you to cover a lot of water. So a spinnerbait is really good during the fall. For like bluffy banks or 45-degree banks, I like a 3/4 ounce spinnerbait for most situations because I can get it down a little bit deeper, I can slow roll it, and it works really well. So other baits that might work include a chatterbait, maybe a swim bait, things like that. Anything that imitates a shad is going to do fairly well as long as you have the right type of cover and structure around for that particular bait. Now, if you run into one of those transition areas where maybe you've got some boulders that fell off of a bluff, or you've got maybe a rocky transition from chunk rock to smaller rock, and you want to slow down a little bit, the perfect offering is a jig. You know, whether it's a football jig like this one right here, or a finesse jig, those are both really key players during the fall for these type of rocky banks. And so if you're looking to slow down, pick up a jig, football jig or a finesse jig, and just slowly crawl it over those banks, over those boulders, and things like that. So you can slow down just a little bit to capitalize on fish that aren't willing to chase, you know, something like a spinnerbait. So anyways, guys, we may not be fishing traditional rock piles on the TVA, but rocky transition banks are key during the fall.
And that's it for this video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you like the structure of these videos and the type of information we're sharing, leave a comment down below. Lets us know that we're doing the right thing and that we should keep going. Also, let us know if there's other topics you want us to cover down in the comments. Make sure to also like the video and subscribe to the Bass Fishing Declassified YouTube channel to see all of our recent uploads. Thanks for checking out this video. We'll see you all next one.